If there is anything you don't know about Overwatch, even if you've been playing Overwatch for a long time, I'm going to be covering literally everything that you should need to know about Overwatch, from basics to high-tier advanced concepts. My name is Nate, and welcome to Blizzard Guides. I'm going to be covering three sections: basics, intermediate stuff, and then advanced concepts. In the basics, I'm just going to be talking about hero roles, so I'll explain what it means to play tank and the differences between main tank and off tank and main healer and off healer, and just a bunch of stuff like that. On top of that, I'll also give you some tips about team comps so that you can know what works where. In the intermediate section, I'm going to be explaining team fights, callouts, positioning, and game mode strategies, since I know that's something that a lot of players need to know about. And then finally, in the advanced section, I'm just going to be going over the ult economy, creating space, and then counterpicking. I'll hook you up with some timestamps in the description as well as menus in the video, just to show you what timestamp you need to go for each section. So if you want to skip ahead, I don't hate you, go ahead. But with that said, let's hop into this video. So welcome to the basics. Don't worry if you've stopped by, you're not bad if you've stopped at this section, it's just easiest to call it basics. If you're a person looking to learn more on how to play the game seriously, or you just don't play it too often, you're in the right section. There are three parts to this section. So part 1 is all about hero roles. So first off, we've got the damage category, or the DPS category. DPS just refers to damage per second, or just the fact that they can actually do damage. Like the name implies, their job is to do damage. You can roughly kind of put them into categories, but it is super loose, so if you play a lot, don't murder me for saying this, I'm just trying to give a basis to learn from. So first off, you've got the flankers, which are the very mobile heroes whose goal is just to get in and deal bursts of damage, or just to harass the enemy team. These guys usually die easily if they're not moving, so you want to be as annoying as possible and as safe as possible. These are generally the fastest and most aggressive on the supports. Then there's the area of denial heroes, whose goal is to gain control of an area and make it dangerous to pass through. These guys get a lot of hate, but they're still really good at their job. And finally, there's the ranged heroes, whose job is to control high ground, but they're also usually easier kills because they don't have that much mobility. These heroes are a much more difficult to master bunch, but they're still some of the better ones currently. Now, keep in mind that these are very loose fits, and these heroes have their own places, so don't take this completely as the standard. For example, like I put Reaper in the flanker category, but he's definitely way more of a tank buster, and he can be run in a lot more of non-flanker stuff. So please, comment section, just don't hate on me for putting Reaper in that section, or any of the others for that matter. But after the damage category, I'm going to be talking about the tanks. Tanks define the battlefield. They 100% control the pace of the fight because they have larger health pools and lower damage, and also their abilities are just focused on providing safety for their team. Tanks come in two flavors: main tank and off tank. Main tanks are Reinhardt, Winston, and Orisa. Main tanks don't do as much damage as off tanks, but they do block a lot of damage. They're the ones that really create the battlefield and control the way the fight feels. They're absolutely the best. I mean, if you can't tell, I really love main tanks. Off tanks include Zarya, D.Va, Roadhog, and Wrecking Ball, or they sometimes call him Hamster or Hammond, but Wrecking Ball's his official name. The off tank helps out the main tank, but also tries to take damage before their lower health friends. So basically, you'll body block or use some of the defensive capabilities that you have in the example of Zarya or D.Va. They do way more damage than the main tanks, so they're a bit more kill hungry than the main tanks. Now, it's pretty important to note that it's pretty bad if you don't run a main tank and an off tank, so make sure that you have both. There's only one situation where you would really want two off tanks, which is D.Va and Wrecking Ball, but otherwise you really do want one of each. Because of that, there's a lot of tank pairs that just pretty much always stick together. First off, there's the brawl tanks, which is Reinhardt and Zarya. Then there's the dive tanks, which is Winston, D.Va, and Wrecking Ball. And then there's the bunker tanks, which is Orisa and Hog. And then the last and second coolest role after my favorites, the tanks, we're at the supports. Supports are the ones that keep their teams from doing stupid things by healing damage that they take, on top of providing other stuff that the supports can do, which could be extra damage, extra speed, or strong CC. Supports can't fight very well, except Brig, and since they keep their team alive, they're the most common targets to attack. And oh, actually they're also usually called healers since they heal a lot. So if I say healers, I also mean supports. Supports like tanks are split up into main healers and off healers. Main healers includes Mercy, Ana, and Moira, and they're way more focused on the actual healing than the secondary stuff that they can provide. The off healers, on the other hand, which includes Zenyatta, Lucio, and Brig, are way more focused on the value that they provide outside of healing, which is everything from defensive ultimates and speed boosts to extra damage and beating the crap out of anything and everyone in Brig's case. So like with the tanks, you just want to have one main healer and one off healer, and the off healer usually protects the main healer. So at part number 2, what you might have figured out is that having 2 tanks, 2 supports, and 2 damage dealers is the standard of Overwatch. People usually call this 2-2-2, writing at 2/2/2. 1 main tank, 1 off tank, 2 DPS, 1 main healer, and 1 off healer. You normally pick tanks that work based on the map, DPS that work based on the map or those tanks that you picked, and then supports that work with the tanks or the DPS. There are a bunch of different 2-2-2 comps that you can pick, so I'm not going to go over all of them. Some of them though are super common like Dive, which includes Winston, Diva, Genji, Tracer, Lucio, and Ana, but that doesn't get played too much because of, Brig existing. Dive comp is literally a comp based off of dive tanks, so you'll pick DPS and supports that don't have a problem with speedy fast allies. DPS can be picked per map if they are exceptionally good on one map, so for example, Ilios Ruins really favors Widow, but you'll find that if the tanks do well on a specific map and they also combo well with specific DPS, then those DPS will also do well on that map. So what I'm trying to say is tank, good map, DPS, also good on that map. So you can either pick the DPS based on the tank or the map. Now, normally people run 2-2-2, but there are also times where you're allowed to break that rule because somebody at Blizzard accidentally turned the dial on some hero way too high. Currently, triple tank, triple support, also known as GOATs, is super strong. It's basically Reinhardt, Diva, Zarya, Lucio, Brigitte, and Moira. GOATs is really mean, and I don't like it. There's a lot of super specific stuff like this that comes up though every once in a while just because of the meta, so triple tank, triple support in particular is a super high burst and super aggressive comp that relies on the speed buff from Lucio and the group healing from Moira to enable the tanks and Brigitte to output high damage while receiving high healing from the area of effect from Lucio and Brigitte. But in normal words, it's just very fast and very strong. And for the unorganized teams that don't have 2 tank players, 2 DPS players, and 2 supports players, which you will find a lot in your ranked games, you probably just want at least one of each role, unless you're doing a super special comp like triple tank, triple support. Without at least 1 tank or support, your teams forget how to actually stay alive for more than 1/8 of a second, and without at least 1 DPS, teams can't kill nothing. So unless you're running Satan's comp like GOATs, you probably want at least 1 of each role. So finally, for the last part in this section, at part number 3, let's go through the laws of the land for picking a 2-2-2 comp. First, you gotta pick tanks that are decent on the map. Overwatch likely isn't too picky about what tanks are run on which map, but there are obviously options that are superior to other options. Brawl tanks are really good for close quarters, dive tanks are really good for maps with many angles that the brawl cop can't block, and bunker cops are really good for holding specific areas, chokes, and the payload, aka camping the hell out of a corner. Secondly, DPS are typically picked based on the map or the tank, which I already mentioned. If the map is open and it has a lot of good angles, snipers and ranged healers are good, or heroes with a lot of mobility if the tanks can keep up with your super speed. If the map is close quarters, flankers and area of denial heroes are best. And finally, any healers are generally good, but some healers do well with specific tanks, DPS, or support. So, like for example, Mercy synergizes really well with Pharah, Ana with Reinhardt, and Lucio with Ana. So you can kind of synergize somewhat there, but really you're just going to be picking your healers based on the value that they provide, and also the defensive ultimates. So if the enemy team has a lot of really good offensive ultimates like Zarya's Graviton Surge, Genji's Blade, Hanzo's Dragon, you probably want something that has Transcendence, aka Zen, or Sound Barrier, aka Lucio. So with that, I'm done with the basics section. Let's move on to the more intense concepts. So hello there and welcome to the intermediate section. Here, I'm going to be talking about team fights, callouts, positioning, and objective strategies. If you play a bit of comp and you really want to go all in, or you're just starting to take it seriously now, you're in the right spot. I'm going to be having 4 parts to this section. Starting us off at part 1, we've got team fights. Teamfights aren't an official Overwatch thing, but it's still something that everyone agrees on, just like the entire community agrees that Brigida is broken. Teamfights are just fights where the entire 6-member team fights the entire other 6 members of the enemy team. If your entire team attacks the enemy team and has all teammates still standing, the objective is pretty much free to capture if you use all of your potential. Therefore, you just want to attack all together so that the full fighting power is in effect. Teamfights have 4 different specific phases. So first off, there's the poking phase. This is the phase where the attacking team will move forward, try and gain a pick and not lose a member, while the defensive team protects the objective. The defensive team is usually sticking to one spot where it is easiest to defend, and the attacking team is following a path, usually through a choke, to the objective. It is way easier for defensive teams to hold chokes, so most teamfights start at or before the choke point. In the poke phase, you're not going to want to use all of your abilities. You're better off coming up with a plan of who you're attacking, how you're going to do it, where you're going, what ults you're going to be using, and all of that. Once your team has the full master plan trademark pending in effect, you're going to be jumping in and moving to the engagement phase. After the poke phase, you're in the engagement phase. This is where you're going to be dumping all of your E's, Q's, shifts, and mic spams and attempting to get huge picks on the enemy team like main tanks, supports, or carry DPS. Carry DPS literally meaning DPS that are performing well. It's not like how some games have a specific meaning to carry DPS. I literally just mean good DPS players. This is the part where most picks happen, but it only does last a few seconds. Once both teams have engaged, you begin the mid fight. This is where the fight lasts the longest, where teams start to forget their plan and start doing their own thing. You're going to have to be dealing as much damage as you can, focusing and trying to get your teammates to kill enemies that might have ult, get your ultimates out, and then in the end, just clean the floors with the enemy. Some heroes do way better the longer the team fight, and some do better the quicker, either because of abilities that require damage to be dealt, or the fact that they don't do well after they've used up all of their abilities, or just because they have specific abilities that let them get a big advantage in the fight the longer that the fight draws out. Examples would include Mercy resurrecting an ally, or Zarya getting more charge as the fight draws out, letting her do way more damage and gain way more ult. The mid fight is where your team is most likely to be split up though, so you really gotta be on top of your game. Callouts are ideal here, so make sure that you stick by for the callout section so that you have a little bit of understanding what you should be doing. So finally, after the winning team has clearly gained more picks, the cleanup phase begins. This is usually a 4v2 or a 3v1. There is still a chance to win the fight if you're the losing team though, but that requires that your brain go into overclocker mode and make some crazy smart plays, so don't count on it. Cleanup is its own phase though, just because there is still a chance for staggered respawns, meaning that the first kill that your team got has respawned and returned to the fight, helping out his last few teammates that are alive. You need to clean up and completely kill the enemy team members in this phase, otherwise you cannot defend or capture the objective. A super important thing to note though is that the team that gets the first pick almost always wins the first fight, so capitalizing on that is a huge deal. If you get first pick, you're gonna have a significant advantage. Next up at part number 2, we've got callouts. In Overwatch, there are 3 basic types of callouts. First and foremost, there are just target calls. This is basically calling out of position enemies, or easy kills, or just low health targets. This lets your team focus on them and kill them a lot faster and a lot easier. Examples would include Kill Zen, Zen 1, Zen out of position, Focus Zen, Zen feeding, or simply screaming Zen a lot into the mic. Following that though, we've got position callouts. Because Overwatch doesn't have a standard position callout guide, probably because of the amount of maps, most players just use relative positioning. Pretty much you just say stuff like Winston's top right, Winston's behind, Winston in our spawn, Winston on our side, Winston on point, or dear God, Winston's right on my head, somebody please help me. Also, I don't have much time to go into the specific per map callouts, so I'm just planning on releasing a separate guide for all position callouts sometime soon, so maybe consider getting subscribed so that you don't miss that. But finally, there are going to be some shot calling callouts that don't really fit into the first 2 types and just fit into their own general shot calling quote unquote section. Calling out to help or to peel allies just means using your abilities to kill the attacker on that ally, to heal that ally, or to use protection abilities on that ally, or maybe to just provide a distraction for that ally. So if somebody says help Anna, or peel for Anna, or I need peel, or I need help, or anything like that, that's usually usually what that means. Calling ults or just saying no more ults happens a lot, so listen up when somebody says that. Calling positions or 3-2-1s is another thing that happens a lot, so basically teams will say, let's go left side, or get ready, we're gonna go in 3-2-1, let's go. Also, alternatively, there is also the fall back and push up calls. That usually just means follow your team, or I guess maybe your main tank, to that location. If you're the one calling this, you have to call spots that either force the enemy into uncomfortable positions or your team into ideal positions that favor your abilities. Don't just blindly call, hey, we should probably try left side now, or we'll probably try right side this time. You have to actually know where you're going and calling it and why you're calling it. Otherwise, just don't worry about it and let somebody else try and call it out. So speaking of positions, at part number 3, let's talk about each role's positioning. Positioning in Overwatch is easy once you understand it. If you're a tank, you should generally be the first thing that the enemy sees, and you gotta take the damage first. If you are a tank that is a dive tank, you want to play far back and then jump in during the engagement phase of the team fight and play deep after that. If you're a brawl tank, you probably want to play a bit more forward because of your lack of range and suppress the enemy as much as possible, or basically just be as annoying and in their face as you can realistically be. If you're a bunker tank, playing in an easy controllable area is ideal, and only playing aggressive in the cleanup phase is the norm. I'm pretty sure I mentioned it earlier, but it's just camping really hard in one corner. If you are a DPS player, you almost always want to control high ground or choke points. You should be either behind your tanks, in between your tanks or supports, or by your supports. If you're easily punishable because you don't move fast, play with your supports and on high ground. If you're mobile, you should play near your tanks, behind the enemy if you're actually good, or far back and then engaging quickly and playing deep. However, with that said, let's say that your support keeps getting killed by, I don't know, maybe their tracer. Then it's a good idea to maybe switch to something that can CC the tracer and kill her and play near your support so that your support doesn't die too much. As a DPS, you're more able to quickly get to people that are in need and deal damage to the attacker that's on that person that's in need, because your tanks still do have to protect your team from the general damage. So if there's ever a situation where your supports are dying way too quickly, or maybe your tank, you can switch to a DPS that will help out. I know that's typically not under the DPS kit, but it's something that you should do regardless, just because ranked games are unorganized and players don't know what the heck they're doing 90% of the time. Now, if you're playing a support, you should be playing back unless the enemy team has a flanker, in which case you should play closer to your DPS like I mentioned. If the enemy has a sniper, you should also play your angles very carefully or extremely close to your tanks. If you're an off healer, you should 100% be more inclined to stick with the bulk of your team, or at least very close to your main healer. If you are a main healer though, you probably want to position near what can help you based on what is harassing you. So like I said, if there's a tracer on you probably want to play closer to your DPS, and if there's a sniper, you want to play closer to your tanks. And finally, the last part of this section, at number 4, we're going to be going into game mode strategies. So for Assault, you gotta be using strong ult combos to quickly wipe the enemy on attack. If there's anyone that's struggling and not dying fast, you're gonna have a problem with the respawns. It's super annoying. You really have to manage the enemies that are trickling in. The defensive team builds ults slightly faster than the attacking team, so it's also important that you are careful with your ultimates and make sure that your ultimates aren't cancelled by the defending team's ultimates. If you're playing on defense, you gotta go for those huge protections on the enemy team's ultimates by paying attention to the amount of damage that they're healing and dealing. You then also got to use your ultimates to counteract the enemy's ultimates. And then on top of that, you just need to get massive picks early in the fight so that your team doesn't get attacked with full force. If you get a teammate picked early on, you're probably going to lose the objective there. So definitely just don't do that. Don't die early. Don't die early. But for the payload on attack, you need to stagger your ultimate so that each time the defensive team tries to retake the objective, you use an ultimate or two so that they don't have the opportunity to actually win the game. Losing friends isn't as bad on Assault, but you still have to push up a lot and make sure that the stuff in front of the payload isn't super dangerous. If you're on defense, you don't want the enemy team to control anything in front of the cart, so you want to wipe the enemy really cleanly and carefully at a spot that is really easy to hold, like a corner or a choke point, and then use that choke point or corner to your advantage. It makes it really hard on the attacking dudes to actually get anywhere with the cart, so just keep that in mind. Always hold a corner once you have control of the objective. For control, finally, if you have control of the objective, winning fights with 1 or 2 ults is what you should be doing, controlling the part of the map where your team holds best. So for example, if your team has range, having your tanks either play up or behind and having your range damage dealer safe is the smartest thing to do. 2. If you've got a dive comp, you want to play back and engage on the attacking team whenever they try and retake the point. If you're a bad player and you don't have control of the objective, you want to use your ults quickly to wipe the enemy team, a lot like when you play attack on assault, except you want to be careful not to use all your ults since you'll need a few to defend the point after. Also, I was just kidding about being bad. You probably will use the point a lot. I needed something to spice up the voiceover so you don't fall asleep. But now we've blasted through the intermediate section, let's slide on down to the advanced concepts. Congratulations, you've made it to the advanced section. Here, I'm covering a lot of stuff that you should have some exposure to just because you've played comp consistently, but I'm also explaining it so that you don't have to spend your time picking up bits and pieces here and there from random streams or random ranked games. It's stuff that's crucial to ranking up and getting a lot better, so there's a chance that you probably know a bit about these things, but I'm going further in depth and more comprehensive than most of the things that you've probably heard. I'm going to cover ult economy, creating space, and counter picking. So at part number 1, ultimate economy just means the amount of ult charge that your team has. Controlling the economy means using specific ultimates to stop enemy ultimates, using your ultimates to gain ultimate charge for your friends, or just using ultimates in some order so that you don't waste all of your ultimates in one go like a noob. This means that you actually have to plug in your mic to communicate if you have ult, how close you or your enemy is to ult, and the order that you're going to be using your ults. Now, it's important to know that there are 3 types of ultimates and their uses specifically for the ultimate economy. First off, you've got the damage dealing or kill confirming ultimates, which only get kills, and it's basically your Call of Duty close your brain and frag out stuff. You're not actually increasing the amount of ultimate charge your teammates have. As a matter of fact, you're actually taking away, but it's still good because you're only using it to secure or defend an objective. Then on top of that, there are the buffing / defensive ultimates, which provide protection or allow allies to do more damage. These are basically your make everything strong abilities. They're almost always all support abilities, so stuff like Ana's Nano Boost or Zenyatta's Transcendence. These ultimates are not only for keeping teammates alive, but they're also for giving allies ways to deal more damage and get more ultimate charge. So for example, Nano Boosting a high charge Zarya gives her way more ult charge because she goes crazy with the amount of damage that she can do. She does more damage and she gets more ult charge. Similarly, if you use defensive ultimates like Transcendence or Lucio's Beat, it allows your team to go in deeper and get more ult charge. And finally, there are also those area of denial or area of effect ultimates that alone don't do very much, but combined with other ultimates or abilities can be super crazy good. Notable and very obvious examples include Reinhardt's Earth Shatter, Zarya's Graviton Surge, and Sombra's EMP. These ultimates can either be used to confirm kills if comboed well, defend objectives, or just give teammates ult charge. So a great example of good ult economy and management would be a Zarya grabbing 2 or 3 enemies, letting a Reinhardt steal play of the game and get enough ult charge to get his shatter, and then using his shatter next fight to allow his Genji to dash through and pick up ult charge, which means that you use these ultimates to provide allies with a boost in ult economy. Basically, you're chaining ultimates. On top of that, there are also ways of using defensive ultimates, so Lucio's and Zenyatta's, to counter enemy ultimates. So let's say if your team is grabbed, using Transcendence can prevent the enemy Genji's Dragon Blade to deal damage to your teammates, effectively nullifying the value of both Graviton and Dragon Blade of the enemy team. You want to use ultimates in such a way that it basically cancels out enemy ultimates, gets kills, or provides your team with ultimates. Using these in tandem based on what kind of status your ultimates are out is ideal. So for a quick example, let's say that you have all 6 ultimates, you're probably not going to want to use ultimates to provide your teammates with ultimates, and rather you're just going to use them to get quick team wipes and win fights. However, you need to make sure that you don't waste all of your ultimates in one go. It's paying attention to how your ult status is doing across all of your teammates and using ultimates based on that really truly wins games. So next up at part number 2, we're going to go over creating space. Creating space is a really weird thing. Basically, creating space is just a concept that is crucial to tanks but still also applies to DPS or supports. What creating space means is it's just forcing the enemy back through the use of abilities such as Deadeye, deflecting or diving as Winston, or shielding and walking forward as Ryan, etc. If you're forcing the enemy backwards, you're going to be opening up angles for your DPS or areas for your supports to be in so that your DPS can miss more shots without dying. Creating space is easier whenever you have an advantage, so like if the enemy Ana needs to heal their Genji because your McCree landed a headshot on them, then you can play aggressive as Ryan onto the enemy Ryan since the Ana's attention is away, and then the Reinhardt with less heals, aka the about to lose enemy Ryan, will lose health quicker, forcing him backward, opening up space for your McCree to not die under 3 seconds. You can do this from any role, but knowing when space is opened up and when you can open up space is super important for success on any role. It comes down to recognizing where the resources of the enemy team is going so that you can abuse the fact when resources are taken away from an enemy, and then you can focus them or put pressure on them so that they have to back up, and eventually everything from their enemy team backs up, because generally when one person backs up, everyone else backs up. So finally, at part number 3, at the last part of the video, counterpicking. Overwatch is heavily centered around the idea of counterpicking, so knowing what types of heroes counter each other is ideal. Unfortunately, I cannot get into the specifics because I put way too much into this video, but basically let's go with the obvious example that pretty much everybody that's played a bit of Overwatch has known now. So for example, if you're playing Zenyatta and you're getting repeatedly killed by the enemy Tracer, which is an obvious counter, Tracer counters Zenyatta, then switching to Brigitte to counter the Tracer is a super smart move. You absolutely need to really do this way more than you think you should, because it really makes games way easier. Pick up a few heroes that are all counters to each other. So for example, I'm just oddballing one out. We could say Winston, Reaper, and Widowmaker. Reaper counters Winston, Winston counters Widowmaker, and Widowmaker somewhat counters Reaper. By playing Reaper against a Winston, you know what kind of things Winstons are going to be doing, which in turn teaches you what Winston will do against a Widowmaker, and you can just kind of synergize all of that information that you're learning in a smart, super intelligent way so that you learn the counters. And yeah, it's a really bad example, I know, but you kind of get what I'm saying, I hope. Though I don't know why people don't do it more. It's literally free SR that they're just too lazy to pick up. And also a really quick thing, take into account that on Assault, the defensive team spawn is way further back than the attacking team spawn, so you can actually pick easily counterable heroes on the first point and do well, since the enemy team probably won't have much time to switch your counter. So for example, playing a Pharah is a good option on certain 2CP maps on first point, since the enemy team might not have hit scan and might not have time to switch. Though this doesn't always work, so your mileage may vary, but just keep that in mind, it can save your games at times. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I spent way too much time on this video and I spent a lot of time on it, so I really do hope that you enjoyed it and that I didn't miss anything. If I did, feel free to let anybody in the comments below know, and I'll make sure to heart your comment and provide feedback on it, and just also let me know what you thought about this video in the comments, and if it helped, drop a like on this video. If you want to see more tips and tricks videos like this, as well as guides videos and Twitch weekly Overwatch highlight videos, you should get subscribed and notified so that you never miss an upload. If you want to join the Blizzard Guides community, or just ask some specific questions to me or anybody from the community, just join our Discord through the link in the video description, and follow our Twitter at Blizzard_Guides and our Instagram at Overwatch.guides. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Have a nice day. My name is Nate, and this was Blizzard Guides.